this symposium on Doug Engelbart and the unfinished revolution in computing and network technology, we asked a revolutionary in her own right to set the context. Condoleezza Rice, while on President George Bush's National Security Council staff, engineered, with some others, the dissolution of the Soviet Empire, the reunification of Germany, and the reestablishment of separate and independent republics of numerous client states of the former USSR, all of which are attempting now to establish or have realized both democratic forms of government and market-based economies. During her tenure as provost at Stanford, and to mark the special relevance of her appearance at this symposium, you should know that Provost Condoleezza Rice has been responsible for the transformation of Stanford's administrative systems, for a thorough and systematic upgrade of the Stanford University network in each and every one of Stanford's 400-plus buildings, and for numerous generative and support services for more effective use of academic information technology resources, including the innovative Academic Technology Specialist program run by my organization, the Stanford University Libraries. It has been an honor to serve Stanford during Condi's watch. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Stanford's Chief Academic and Operating Officer, Professor of Political Science, Condoleezza Rice.
Good morning. I have the great pleasure of welcoming you on behalf of Stanford University to this session on Engelbart's Unfinished Revolution. Sorry about that. Technology sometimes doesn't help. The purpose of this gathering is twofold. In the first place, we are here to celebrate and explore the contribution of one individual, Douglas C. Engelbart, who, with a small group of gifted collaborators, changed the world as we know it by presenting an entirely new model of how computers could be used. The second reason for this gathering is to examine how far along this revolution in computers has come and how far it still has to go. It is singularly appropriate that this symposium take place at Stanford. Not only has Stanford been in the forefront of the history of computing, as it was through the Stanford Research Institute, as it was then known, that the host for this team, whose spectacular achievement was taken there in the public demo that we have just seen in this few recorded moments. You will be hearing much more today about that demo from those who made it happen, as well as from a few of those whose lives and livelihoods were profoundly affected by it. That demo is emblematic to me of some important facets of Stanford's mission and culture. It was, in the first place, immensely practical. You may not know that in their trust for Stanford University, Jane and Leland Stanford were particularly concerned that Stanford would be a place that prepared its students for practical work, for the real world into which they were to go and make it better. That vision is encompassed in what we celebrate today. Engelbart and his team realized that concept and then made it a realization. It was practical in that it was oriented to building tools to enhance or augment human productivity and capacity for managing, and more significantly from our perspective in education, for sharing information. Stanford is a place that has always celebrated and encouraged change and practical work. It has done so through a program of technology transfer from basic research and from the basic laboratory into the life of the country and the life of the economy, more successful than any similar effort in the country. It is that also that we celebrate today, how basic knowledge becomes practical knowledge, which makes all of our lives better. I want to congratulate our co-sponsor, the Institute of the Future, celebrating its 30th year, and to encourage you to enjoy, celebrate, experience, and document this revolution, and in doing so, to point a future for the continued revolution that we experience every day as computers become more and more a part of our lives, looking for the ways in which human experience and human lives can be improved through them. Thank you very much. Welcome to Stanford, and I hope you enjoy the day.
Good morning. My name is Mike Keller. I'm the University Librarian and the Director of Academic Information Resources. This month's Vogue cover lady tells us that it takes a village to raise kids. It takes heroes and theorists. It takes charismatic leaders and quartermasters, propagandists and foot soldiers, fifth columnists, and yes, even venture capitalists to make a revolution. We are here today to revel in the groundbreaking work begun by Doug Engelbart and the folks who worked with him in the Augment Lab at SRI. We are here as well to think about what has not yet been realized in making information technology as effective as it might be for collaborative work between and among people in every aspect of their lives, in every place on and off planet Earth. Doug Engelbart is one of the heroes of the revolution. However, I should point out to you that he is not history any more than any of us are history. If by some cataclysmic tragedy all humans disappeared from the planet, the generative processes, the leaps and bounds of imagination, the documentation of the painstaking work of the most creative engineers bringing innovation to the IT revolution would not be available to the few humans left in the space station who would have the intriguing and presumably pleasurable task of rebuilding the population of our species. Paul, Saffo, and I want this day not only to be a celebration of innovation and a forecasting event, but as well an event to emphasize the importance for society in general and for the engineering profession in particular to get a whole lot more self-conscious about seeing that the working papers, notebooks, lab records, correspondence, diagrams, and other seeming ephemera of your work get into the hands of such organizations at the Stanford Silicon Valley Archive. For it is from an appreciation of the past that the future springs. It is completely true that Doug Engelbart is a giant in our field. It is also completely true that he stands on the shoulders of giants who came before him. Others now stand on his shoulders, even as he continues to exert influence through the Bootstrap Institute. A good number of giants walking the earth today are presenters on this symposium program. I would like to thank each of them for taking time in busy, productive lives to join us today. Some of them have come from far away, and an extra measure of thanks goes to those travelers. The Stanford University Libraries and the Institute for the Future are delighted to recognize and to thank the sponsors of this day devoted to Engelbart's unfinished revolution: Logitech, Bank Boston Robertson Stevens, the Council on Library and Information Resources, IBM, Sun Microsystems, and Phase 2 Strategies. The symposium organizers would not be possible without additional supporters whom we also acknowledge with thanks: SRI International, the Churchill Club, the Industry Standard, Digital Persona, Wired Magazine, Herman Miller Incorporated, the Cersei Corporation, Cunningham Communication, and Wired Digital. I hope you all enjoy the day. And now here is my partner in this and many other crimes, Silicon Valley's leading forecaster and commentator, Paul Saffo.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, and I join Mike in welcoming you all to what I think is going to be a very special day. We're going to start out by looking back 30 years at an extraordinary event that happened about 25 miles north of here, run out to the present and race on ahead in the afternoon to the next 30 years. We're going to spend some time on history, but even in looking at the history, I invite you all to contemplate the word unfinished in the title of the day's events, The Unfinished Revolution, because the extraordinary thing is, even with the events that were demonstrated 30 years ago, more remains unfinished that has been completed. But first of all, close your eyes and imagine you have just traveled back 30 years. You are all young computer professionals sitting in the Civic Auditorium up in San Francisco at the AFIPS meeting, the American Federation of Information Processing Societies, the hot cutting-edge computer science group of the day. It's December 1968. The Dead played at Winterland 2 nights ago. Inlegata de Vida is one of the hot songs on the hottest radio stations in the Bay Area. Time sharing as a notion is barely 30 years old. The cutting-edge computer that everyone lusts after is the IBM 360. The cutting-edge activity being figured out at the time is data processing. Still is, some things never change. And the dominant manner of interacting with machines is via punch card. And you're at this conference and you wander into a plenary session where this unknown by the name of Doug Engelbart and his team are doing a demo. And you're not quite sure what to expect, but the lights dim, the demo comes on, and this is what you see. If we could run the video, please.
The research program that I'm going to describe to you is quickly characterizable by saying, if in your office you as an intellectual worker were supplied with a computer display backed up by a computer that was alive for you all day and was instantly responsive, instantly responsive to every action you had, how much value could you derive from that? Well, this basically characterizes what we've been pursuing for many years in what we call the Augmented Human Intellect Research Center at Stanford Research Institute. Now, the whole session is going to be devoted to trying to describe and present to you the nature of this program, but unfortunately, or fortunately, the products of this program, the technology of it, lends itself well to an interesting way to portray it for you. So we're going to try our best to show you rather than tell you about this program. We've used this tool to do our daily work, and our system has been built, this time-sharing system, for about 6 months now. It's been working, and in that time we've gone from getting 1 console to getting about 6 working now, with 6 more due the rest of the spring. This is our 4th computer in which we've had this kind of a system, so we've learned a lot about the user features we want and how to be fairly skillful. But this next step about learning how, when you're faced with having this in your office all day, as I now do, in a very exciting sense, how do you put that to work for yourself? How do you organize your files? What kind of things do you do? I'd like to come in now and begin to telling you something about the implementation. So I'm going to open up under here and talk to you about the control techniques, control devices, control dialogue, and control meta-language that we're using. Okay, to talk about control devices, we'll use this overhead camera shot where you can see the devices that I'm using. I use 3, and they're not all standard. We have a pointing device called our mouse, a standard keyboard, and a special key set we have here. And we're going to go for a picture down in our laboratory in Menlo Park and pipe it up that'll show you from another point of view more about how that mouse works. Come in, Menlo Park. Okay, there's Don Andrews' hand in Menlo Park. And in a second we'll see the screen that he's working and the way the tracking spot moves in conjunction with movements of that mouse. I don't know why we call it a mouse. Sometimes I apologize. It started that way and we never did change it. All right, as it moves up or down or sideways, so does the tracking spot. And the principles for its operation are quite easy to see. If you'll turn it over, Don. Can you hear me, Don? Would you turn it over and we'll see, right. Its principle is that there are 2 wheels that roll on the surface. But since they're at right angles and kind of sharp edges, one roll and the other slide in one direction. Each of these wheels controls through a potentiometer with a voltage output sampled by an 80V converter the numbers taken in by the computer at sample times as to what the horizontal vertical components are to be of where it should put the tracking spot. The way we use it continuously and exclusively is to watch the screen and to follow it around, and we use this merely as a device to move that tracking spot, and you're eyeing the tracking spot, you really don't care whether it follows exactly this or not. In fact, we've had it at times where our tracking device, you had to move in an arc like that to make the tracking spot go on a horizontal line. And people adjusted to it and would go like that to go in a straight line and wouldn't even know that they were doing it. Now the keyboard in the middle is essentially a standard typewriter keyboard except for a few special keys out on the side. The computer knows it instantly when you hit one and makes an appropriate response. This device over here is unique to us, and we always have to justify and explain it. We'll do it in reverse order. We'll explain it first. It provides for you the one-hand equivalent of what you can do with a keyboard. There are 5 keys, and normally each finger sits on a key, and depressing any one key at a time produces a character. And any 2 keys at a time also. And in fact, any combination of depressing, of which there are 31 combinations.
What you've seen is a very small selection from an hour-and-a-half tape that we're very fortunate to have from that original demo. We were very torn in setting up this day about whether we should show the full hour-and-a-half video, and we decided not to. You'll be seeing clips throughout the day. If you want to look at it in more depth, the video is available in various forms on the web. And it bothered me that we couldn't show the whole video because unless you see the whole video, you couldn't begin to understand the impact that this had or begin to understand the ideas embedded in the work that Doug and his team were doing. And then I realized that was a microcosm of the whole challenge. You see, this project in general and Doug Engelbart in particular stand as the single most misunderstood pioneers in the history of computing. And it's absolutely astonishing how fortunes have been made while in fact standing on a whale fishing for minnows. The mouse is the tip of a much larger iceberg. There are vastly more things going on in here than even come through if you sat through the whole video. But the thing we do know is that this demo set a brush fire burning that swept across the computing landscape that inspired one researcher after another to head off in their own direction. It quite literally wrenched the trajectory of computing off the course that had been going for the previous 10 years, and things have never been quite the same yet. And so now what we're going to do is start in 1968 and roll fast forward through the day into a future 30 years from now. And our first guides on this is a panel of esteemed computer scientists in the thick of activities here in Silicon Valley today, but every single one of them was involved in that demo in one way or another. So please join me in welcoming our first panel. I will join them in a second. They need to get mic'd up. But as they're getting mic'd up, let me say a word or two about who's up here. Over on my far right is Stuart Brand. Stuart is the co-founder of GBN, Global Business Network, and co-founder of his latest new and remarkable project, the Long Now Foundation, which is dedicated to building a 10,000-year clock as an antidote to today's short-term thinking. You'll hear more about this afternoon. It's also the first Y10K compliant computer. I think it's also safe to say it's probably the slowest computer on the planet. He is also has, I think of Stuart as one of those characters, if you ever look in a Renaissance painting, you know, the crowd scene, and there's someone down in the lower left-hand corner, and you notice the face keeps popping up in one painting after another. Stuart has had a knack of starting and turning up at the most amazing events in this valley. He founded the Whole Earth Catalog. In 1984, he founded The Well. And in 1974, he wrote his first book, Two Cybernetic Frontiers, which was one of the two influential books on my career as a young student then. Right next to Stuart is Jeff Rulifson. Jeff is director of the Network and Research Lab at Sun. He has had a long and distinguished career here in Silicon Valley. He's a fellow of the ACM, which gave him its 1990 award for pioneering work in the software field. He also has been in the thick of everything. He was a key player at Roam back in the days when Roam was a leading company around here. Went on to Xerox PARC, and of course, it all began for Jeff at SRI on Doug's team. Next to Jeff is Charles Irby. Charles started out, well, I won't tell you exactly how he started out. I'll wait till the panel begins and let Charles tell you himself. But he was with Doug's project at SRI from 1969 to 75, became the chief architect, taking over from Jeff Rulifson, as I think Jeff went off to graduate school. He later left the team, went to Xerox, where he led the design of the Xerox Star, left and was one of the co-founders of Metaphor in 1982. Charles has a problem with holding a job. Left Metaphor in about 92, was executive vice president at General Magic, left General Magic, was head of VP of Consumer Products at SGI, and his group was the one that produced the Nintendo 64. So his career goes from the Star to the 64. Next to Charles is Bill English. Bill, after the Augment project, went to PARC in late 1972, went to Sun in the early 90s, started out, of course, at SRI, is now, he claims to be retired, but we think it's a lie. The important thing you need to know about Bill, when I was quizzing people, I've known Bill for a long time, and I've never gotten a straight description of what he does. And when I finally figured it out, he was given, in the descriptions given to me, the highest compliment that any software engineer can be given. Everyone said, oh yeah, English. He's the sort of engineer who can make anything work. And next to Bill is, well, Doug. Good. Well, welcome. I'd like to start with each of you just telling us where you were on December 9th, 1968. Doug, I think we know where you were. We have evidence.
I was at the Civic Center. I believe I was producer director of this operation. I was actually at the Civic Center standing on a platform in the back of the room directing the video mixing and hoping everything would hold together.
And Charles, I'm going to save you for last. Okay. Jeff?
So I was in my office at SRI. The only thing on my mind were system crashes. We actually did have one during the day, so I was totally focused on keeping it up.
I was behind the camera. I was not a computer scientist then, and am not now. I was an artist at the time and was starting the Whole Earth Catalog at that same time.
And you were, Stuart, you were at the camera down in SRI.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I never saw the demo until last year when I finally saw a video.
So just looking at the video, it looked like the demo went extraordinarily smoothly. I mean, the demo gods smiled on you all that day. What did we not see?
So we made a movie of this, and if you look through the movie frame by frame, you can find one or two frames in the middle of the movie where there actually was a system crash, but it recovered so fast that nobody noticed.
You can also see the IDA4 projector barely staying alive during parts of the demo.
Well, Charles, mentioning the IDA4, I think it's very hard for people to understand what it was like to do this in 1968. I would love someone just to describe some of the, broad technical details, like how the Ida4 worked.
Well, I turn it over to Bill because he made all that work. So, Bill, tell him.
Well, first of all, it was a challenge. Once we decided we were going to do this event, it was a challenge to get everything from SRI to the Civic Center. I mean, that was 30 miles away. And what we did was lease 2 video circuits from the phone company. They set up a microwave link, 2 transmitters on the top of the building at SRI, receiver transmitter up on Skyline Boulevard on a truck, and 2 receivers on Civic Center. Cables, of course, down into the room at both ends. That was our video link. Going back, we had 2 dedicated 1,200 baud lines, high-speed lines at the time.
Didn't we drop one of them for a while?
Don't remember dropping one of them. I think
Homemade modem?
homemade modems, yeah. And we ran, those were essentially leased lines, dedicated lines, and all the signals went back on those lines, and the voice went back on those lines. I believe we used one for voice and one for data going back is the way we managed that. And I don't remember dropping either one of them. We stayed together pretty well on that. That was the linkage from SRI to the Civic Center. The other big challenge was the projector, and that was, we used an Ida4, a Swedish projector. Complex machine. I guess we don't have pictures of it, but it was a large machine, almost 6 feet tall, an arc light projector. And what it did was focus the arc light on a spherical mirror. The mirror was wiped with a windshield wiper blade that smeared oil over it between each frame, and the electron beam actually wrote the image in the oil. And it was an incredible method. It was a great machine. It actually worked. We managed to borrow one. It belonged to Ames Labs, and we borrowed it from Ames Labs. And this particular one would run at the high resolution, high at the time, 875 line television that we were using.
It ran really hot and drew a lot of electricity, right?
Yes.
Pardon?
It ran really hot and drew a lot of electricity, right?
Yeah. It worked. The whole thing worked. Ida4 was a great projector. It was perhaps got a little blurry at times, but it didn't fail during the whole operation, and that was just amazing. Other than that, that's essentially how we did it.
There was a dynamic operation going on. At Bill sitting back there, or standing in that booth, was around there like that, sort of telling everybody when their turn was come on, and don't get panicky now, but yes, yes. And all that was going on in my ear. Wow. So
that was my job as director, telling everybody what to do and what was going on. And also, we had at the back of the stage, we had the video mixer. We had 2 cameras on Doug, one of them looking down on the keyboard that you've seen and one on his face. And then we had cameras down at SRI focused on people, and the camera Stuart Brand was running around the computer room to get scenes.
Bill, we didn't have a video signal at SRI. Do we even have an audio signal? Or did our managing director there have the signal and tell us what to do? So it was silence.
Completely blind.
They were
we were just told to do something, and we would do it and hoped that it meant something.
That's exactly right.
And we had a rather primitive mixer at the back of the screen. It would let us do wipes horizontally or vertically and corner inserts and so on. And that was the extent of it. It was a pretty crude system compared to what we have today.
But on the other hand, I think it's hard from a 1998 perspective to think about how impossible this all was in 1968.
It was a real challenge at the time.
Just everything that was being done here was awe-inspiring when you walked into that room.
How long actually was this demo in preparation?
This sound, it makes it very hard for me to...
How long was the demo in preparation? Was this a matter of weeks or months or days?
How long did we set up the Ida4 projector at SRI and practiced with it, and that we probably only had that a week or so ahead of time.
We had some trial runs during the fall, and we started planning in the spring.
Yep.
And we had to go through the process of getting the program committee in the conference to accept this crazy idea. So very unusual. They actually sent a team down to inspect what we were doing. And just to, because to take a whole hour and a half and set up all this, and it potentially could crash. So they were worried about that. And believe me, I was worried about that.
Oh, yes, we were all worried about that.
And you probably preempted a long discussion on changing the format for punch card designs or something.
Probably.
So, Charles, say a word about where you were and how this all looked from your perspective.
Well, I was in the audience, and
You were a graduate student at Berkeley.
no, actually,
Santa Barbara.
I was working at Litton Industries on a ground control system for a precursor to the Skylab program. And prior to that, I had worked with Glenn Keller for 3 years down in Santa Barbara, where we'd done a fairly interactive system for doing mathematical and numerical analysis. So I had some highly interactive, quote unquote, background, but at the time I was working in a very stultifying company. And at the time, basically computers were just for data processing. It was just number crunching. That's basically all anybody was doing with computers. And then you walk, and you're in this conference, and that's kind of what everybody's talking about, and you walk into this plenary session, and it was just mind-blowing. This was something that just changed my whole life, basically, when I saw it. And I think everybody in the auditorium, it was a big auditorium, and it was absolutely maxed out. People were lined up along the wall everywhere. It was really, really crowded. A lot of people couldn't even get in. And it was just the buzz of the whole conference after it happened. In fact, we did it a year later for the ASIS, the American Society of Information Sciences, and it was just as big and effective then. But basically, I was so inspired by what I saw there that I sought out Bill English right after the show, and he let me know that they actually had some openings in the group. And the next day, I was down there in suit and tie.
I remember
at SRI, and I sat in the personnel office and said, I'm not leaving until I get to talk to Bill English, and I sat there for many hours, and finally I got to see Bill English, and a few weeks later I was working there.
So any regrets, Bill?
Pardon?
Any regrets about your hire?
No, it worked out fairly well.
Good. Yeah,
Charles, I got a question. At what point in the demo, did your mind start to blow?
Well, the work that we had done on quote interactive systems used a storage tube, and I don't know if you guys have ever even seen a picture, but the screen was about this big in a box that was as large as a big suitcase, and it just drew a picture on it, and it was just stayed there until you wiped it off, and then you drew another picture. So we were able to do simple numerical analysis that way, drawing simple graphs and things. But to see a highly interactive system like this, where the screen was dynamically changing, where there was a dynamic pointing device, where there's so much thought had been given to how the human interacted with the system, was just mind-blowing for that time. I mean, today is commonplace, but at that point in time, it was just completely revolutionary.
Now, I know when I've talked to folks who were there, and this is one of those events where it's kind of like Woodstock, that if everybody was at this demo who claimed to have been at this demo, I mean, I was there. No. The place was twice the size of Moscone, but the sense you got is that there was a real polarization. There were people whose minds were blown and they got it, and there are other people I've talked to who said, oh yeah, boy, I thought this was the most ridiculous looking thing, that I just couldn't imagine that people were going to talk to computers and do all this stuff. Now, is that a misimpression I have? Was there a polarization at the time?
Well, there was a mindset that computers were for adding and subtracting numbers and simple logic and doing trajectory computations and things like that. And the idea that a computer, this incredibly valuable asset, would be dedicated to interacting with a person on a full-time basis was unthinkable. It was just unthinkable at that point in time.
Some of that is just basic economics of the day, because computers were so expensive at the time. And you have to hear about what it cost us to make the display systems. The experimental one that Bill got for us in 1964, in which we did basic experiments, he's told me that it's about $80,000 that it costs to put that together, because you couldn't go buy one. And then a radical change in the next stage, where we got this video setup of our own. You had to make your own to do that. And then the computers are so big and expensive. And so it was ludicrous from the point of view of the current day paradigms, the current day economics. But it's all based on saying there's huge faith that the prices are going to come down, performance is going to go up, and it's going to take time to learn how to harness that inside our organizations. So it'd be important to get started.
Now, we all take the curve of Moore's Law for granted today. We're still just as surprised by it as ever that things are going to get cheaper and higher performance. In 1968, had that idea really seeped into the consciousness of the computing community?
Not that I
don't think so.
I was going to go out on a sort of a limb here at Stanford. I was actually a graduate student at Stanford at the time, working full-time at SRI and on the honors co-op program. And a year later, I reached a point where I really had to do serious thesis work. And I actually couldn't talk anybody into the computer science department into doing research about Doug's ideas, because it wasn't computer science at that time. So I had to go off and do artificial intelligence in order to get out of Stanford.
It was considered lunatic fringe at that point.
Well, this is something over and over again, that the importance of what the prevailing paradigms are in society as they affect what kind of exploratory pursuits will even be considered. It's just very, very large. And one of the really challenging social situations now is that the technology is just exploding. And so the rate at which really new capabilities of startling nature and achievable prices are going to be available in our society is much greater. And yet the rate at which we change our paradigms about what's possible, what's probable, what's feasible, and how much change in organization, that isn't increasing fast enough. So this is a real social hazard. And we lived through that, through those years.
Of course, right, I mean, it was sort of a rough year after 68, but then everybody understood your ideas and things went smoothly, right? Actually, what I'd love to do, Doug, is ask you and Jeff in particular. I mean, my sense of watching the history of your ideas in the project, that this has really been like the blind man touching the elephant, that people seize on little pieces of the larger ideas and they run off with it and do interesting things, but at some level those interesting things never really tie back to the big ideas. What are the big messages that we still don't get from that demo?
Well, my basic one was saying, look, this kind of technology, when you really learn how to integrate it, not just into your office, but into the way you think and work and the skills you have and all of that, can just be hugely more effective ways for people to do their knowledge work, and especially their collective knowledge work. And you have to sit there and think about all the changes, your skills, even the way you read things, and start setting aside the old images of what a book is or something, et cetera. So these were what was really built into that sort of hope and dream. And what I'm still out there saying, maybe we've got a chance now, but then in the 70s, when a lot of this was blossoming, and we really had quite a bit more capability even in there, the prevailing picture of interactive computers was that it's for automating your office. And that was just counter to what we were saying is augmenting, where, hey, accept the fact that if you learn new skills and all of that, you can really harness this. No, it was supposed to come in and automate the kind of things you used to do. So that paradigm just killed us. And you say, well, it put the world back quite a few years before something like the web could get a chance to sprout and show them. But
I was going to say, you would have still, it's a good thing you're not in graduate school anymore, Jeff, because having recently taught a seminar in the computer science department here, I think that's still not computer science, what you're talking about.
I want to push on it a little bit. If you look at all the awards Doug has won, and even if you watch the clips here, a lot of the focus is on gadget stuff, a lot of the clips about gadgets. There's some of it about sort of higher level things about what is an open hyphen document system and how do we integrate our tools on our computers in with our documentation systems and things like that. But there's a much more fundamental thing that Doug was actually onto at that time, which we got, which was somehow if we integrated all of this together the right way, we could get some sort of scaling effect, Moore's Law kind of thing, in our capacity to solve problems, not just in the technology that we make.
A Moore's law effect on society
Right.
as opposed to a Moore's law effect on our machines.
Right, and so, if we had a group of 10 people, they have a certain capability, Doug's terms, to do something, then when we got 20 people together in this new kind of environment, rather than having 1.5 times the capability, we'd have 3 times the capability. So there was some super scaling effect in the vision. And I think that's the part that we're still not onto in the revolution.
I'd like to stick with that for a second. And Doug, if you think it's a good idea, I'd like to just run the clip from the original demo that talks about the goals of the project. Okay? If we could, that's the first time I've gotten Doug to agree with anything of my suggestions.
That's the first time he ever asked me.
If we could run clip number 4, please. And you all will have to look over your shoulders, I'm afraid.
The HIRC is pursuing these goals. Basic goal, improve the effectiveness with which individuals and organizations work at intellectual tasks. What does their effectiveness involve then? Better solutions, faster solutions, solutions to more complex problems, with better use of human capabilities. Really thinking about that. But a corollary goal is, besides improving the effectiveness, to develop a system-oriented discipline for designing the means by which greater effectiveness is achieved. That's very important to us. The approach for this should result in the system-oriented discipline.
Okay.
How have the goals changed? How have the goals evolved? Or have we made no progress?
Well, whose goals you're talking about?
The goals you think we should all be pursuing.
Well, I think it's still there, that there's just an immense potential for improving our collective capability to solve complex issues and problems, and that's been the driving force since the 50s for me, and I'll stagger along with that, I guess, for the rest of my years. And I don't think the world has really bought it. And if it did, there'd be a very much different pursuit about saying, hey, that's really something to go after. And then they'd start questioning, how do we go after it? And that's very different from the sort of piecemeal research and the way the market plays in there now. So this afternoon we'll talk more about that, but it's, to me, it's been a totally serious goal. And the term we've started using in the last 6-8 years is calling collective IQ. And that's saying many things can improve in your society, but that's one that if we really get going on can help us cope with a lot of the other issues which are already serious, and which issues are likely to get even more serious as the rest of this digital revolution happens and everything changes in disorder.
As a professional bystander in this business, and I think about that you all were trying to communicate to the world, and I look what unfolded. The mouse, this peripheral, as part of a deep collaborative environment, ended up being the key enabler for something that, as far as I can tell, was antithetical to what you were doing, a personal standalone device. Then we discover that, yes, in fact, we've learned how to scale our machines at a social level. I got a piece of email last night. It was a large, collaborative, radically and rapidly scaling thing. It was a pyramid scheme via email. So it seems like we always learn the wrong lessons, but just take a second, each one of you, in your own words, and try and communicate to us what the it was behind that demo. What was the essential message of that demo?
I think there were two. One is that a radical shift in how we thought about what computers were for. They weren't just for doing application tasks that were done in the past by hordes of people adding things up. It was actually, it could be used to actually change the way you thought about solving intellectual problems. And if you did things right, it interacted with you at a pace that was equivalent to where your mind was going and how your mind was working. So there was a speed and interactivity and effectiveness in that very dedicated application was one of them. And the other was that if you had a whole group of people doing this in a shared environment, then you got an amplified effect from all of those people having this system and being able to share a body of knowledge that was constantly increasing and molding and changing in a very organic way.
I'd have to pretty much second what Charles said. I think the biggest message was that a real transformation in the way people viewed computers. Because prior to that time, they were number crunching machines. And this changed at least most of the people, I think. It changed their concept of what you could do.
Jump in, Stuart.
I first saw Space War being played in 1961, 62, and got a sense that there was something different that could be done with computers. And it was starting to move in the direction from humans spending all their effort to make the computer become capable of what the computer was capable of, and starting with Space War and then really reaching a new plateau with this demo, it went the other direction where we were working on computers to make people capable of what they might be capable of. That was a big shift.
So I don't know exactly how to jump into this because I can't remember I can't separate the demo from all the other days that were going on around it. But maybe a slightly different spin on it. 5 years before that, when I first met Doug, I just got the idea somehow from him right away that there was something going on with the use of computers that was sort of more fundamental in the way we would evolve as people and our societies would evolve and how we'd work than all the other kinds of technologies that we were working on. And there was then this other message in it that if we could somehow look at this evolution about the way we change our language, the way we interact, the way we write, the way we do things, and evolve that with the way that we evolve the tools, that we could somehow get this scaling effect into going. And that if we could do that in some sort of a disciplined way, we could make more progress than if we did it in a random way. And I think, so for me, that was sort of the whole theme through it.
I think one of the most interesting things is why that didn't work, why it didn't cascade and become an ever more prevalent idea in the society. Doug's continued to pursue it relentlessly through his whole career, and has obviously made some impact, but why didn't it take off the way all of the gadgetry took off and the software took off?
Well, and especially since the list of Augment NLS alumni reads like a who's who of Silicon Valley, that people came to Doug's team, went on and built some of the key things in this valley. How come it didn't happen?
Well, one perspective on that is that these people all went off and got jobs with commercial companies that were looking for profit.
Like us.
And I think more than ever now, we're profit-driven, and no one has hooked this concept yet to making money.
Is that the crux? That there's a fundamental disconnect between profit-drivenness and the long-term perspective of the goals behind the project?
Part of it, and I think it's research funding work and it's tradition in universities, but I have another sort of interesting story. When I went to Xerox PARC after I left SRI, I was the one that actually went out and hired the first anthropologist to go to work at Xerox PARC. And we got him, it's a long story how we got him, but. So now all of a sudden we had anthropologists in this setting and wanted to start some of this experimentation and study. And interestingly, whenever you want to study people like that, the immune systems come out, right? I mean, they have a hard time studying primitive people, let alone working in a research industrial environment. But some of the strongest antibodies, in fact, came out in the computer science community. The computer scientists themselves were very afraid of being studied in this environment. And that made me realize this is far more complicated than just, people work for commercial companies or the funding agencies want gadgets. They don't want to hear about evolutionary kinds of things. It's a really difficult thing to go and study yourself.
The activity that we were involved in the late 60s, early 70s in Doug's group had to do fundamentally with software and system development. And we, in fact, developed lots of ways of using the system to make software development better. And it is true that a lot of that did carry forward. I mean, there are software development systems today that are much more sophisticated than anything we had, and do embody some of those same sharing principles and leaving notes for each other and being able to track down what changed when and why and so forth. A lot of that has happened. So in that one little microcosm, it did sort of take off. But the bigger picture that we had of sort of inculcating the entire society and changing the way things worked, I think a lot of that didn't take off because the networking infrastructure just wasn't there. It is today, or at least it's beginning to be. And the groundwork maybe has been laid, and maybe the environment's fertile now to actually make some of this happen. But at that time, the infrastructure was just so expensive and so rarely available, it was really hard to do it.
Now, Stuart.
It just occurs to me that maybe the sort of human parallel processing we were shooting for hasn't happened because it isn't possible, which would be fine. Because the thing which was great about this project is it aimed for such an impossible goal that you have to devise new instruments to even get partway there. And this is the way you can actually do pretty deep invention, is aim for something really, really difficult, which might be really important, and then all of the rest falls in train with that. I'm not saying it's impossible. Maybe we've got a mental telepathy or something first, but the very difficulty of the goal is what made this thing go.
Now, one place where this seemed to have a close approach, and it's a part of the project's history that I'm the least clear about, is the links between the ARPANET and what happened there and the ideas that came out of Augment. What I'd love to do is just run a brief clip of Doug saying a word or two about the ARPANET. This is clip number 8, and when you get it queued up, just go ahead and dim the lights and I'll shut up. It'll take a second for them to get to it. But my sense of the history is that your ideas transmogrified in important ways into the emergent ARPANET, which of course was just coming up right then.
Well, the ARPANET.
Let's see, they ready with that clip? Here it goes. There we go.
And a forthcoming involvement is this ARPA computer network, the experimental network that's going to come into being in its first form in about a year and end up sometime later with some 20 experimental computers in a network. And they hope to be able to transmit across the country with bandwidths of something like 20 kilobits per second, delay times of less than 1/10 of a second, which would be enough so that I could be running a system in Cambridge over the network and getting the same kind of response on a CRT. And it may be that people there, the next time we have a conference in Boston, I'll try this from there.
Doug, the project and the ARPANET.
Well, the ARPANET idea was basically established to share computational resources, and so we were told about this in the spring of 1967. Or I guess there were 13 principal investigators that would get together every half year and talk about things. So Bob Taylor and Larry Roberts announced to us that they were going to do this experiment and that they needed computers to connect together, so we were the logical choice. And this, you could just see the consternation in people's faces that, you mean, that's going to come in and stir up and occupy the time of my students and everything? And then they all got sort of smart about it, and they turned to Larry and Bob and said, well, who's going to keep a real index, et cetera, a catalog of all the resources, so if we want to use certain kind of computational resources, we know which computer out there and how to get it from that. And they hadn't thought of that. So for me sitting there, I'd been talking with a group about how are we ever going to get a community going, which is what you're going to have to do to make this work. And there it was, it's going to be a community. So I volunteered to start and operate a network information center that would deal with that. And so that everybody was relieved. So that's why they tied our computer on as the second one. So that's an interesting history of all the internet now. We got there as early as you can get on a network. The number 2. And then in 1970, when we really got up with it, we had email to offer that was hyperlinked email that would hyperlink with everything else. We had a whole bunch of features and stuff as a service and like that. But unfortunately, they were, in order, let's see, Larry Roberts was the one left on that. He had to maneuver politically to try to keep Congress interested in this. So he had to go enlist other DoD computers to tie into it. And a lot of his funds had to turn there. So we couldn't get the support that it would take to just really give service out like that. So, anyway.
Jeff, as I think about the ARPANET, I mean, if one wants to build the catalog of Doug Engelbart's misunderstood ideas, we've always thought of the mouse being at the top of the things, you know, symbolized and misunderstood. But in fact, it sounds like the Network Information Center, in terms of the early pieces that were lopped off the project and pressed into public use, that the NIC may be even more important than the mouse in the history of this project.
Oh, well, yes. I can't think of the follow-on to this, but...
But I mean, it's a fair statement. Well, we have just a few minutes left. I mean, we're just starting the day, and I'd like to end this panel with a couple of question marks and the like, but just any final thoughts about the 68 demo, things that we miss when we look at the demo?
I have a question. Doug, did you know how well it was going over, or were you just talking into the bright lights at that point?
Yeah, couldn't tell.
Couldn't tell.
Then I was so relieved it was over, because if that had crashed, we could very well have lost all our support, because we didn't have real permission to use government money to do this. Don't tell anybody. But the real thing is, so I was untangling myself and standing up and wow and shaking up, and then to look out there and everybody was standing up and applauding, that just almost knocked me off my feet, because no way of telling.
Any other final thoughts? I have one absolutely trivial question, but I want your final thoughts first.
I'm sort of seeing these clips today and looking back on it. It is a very personal sort of observation. Is we had no idea at the time. I had no idea at the time how important this was. Right? I mean, you were just absorbed in it. You were making it happen. You didn't think of it as hard, and it's sort of surprising looking back.
If I have a moment to do a closing.
Please.
I guess I would just encourage everybody who's here today and all of the sessions that go on for the rest of the day to somehow stay focused on the people side of it rather than the equipment and software side of it. It's just so easy. It's so easy to focus on the engineering part of it that's traditional engineering. There's a social engineering and a culture aspect of this that somehow just always dies away and gets lost in the shuffle.
In fact, if there should be a theme for the day, it's how do we get this Moore's Law scaling factor experimentation going?
Outside of pyramid schemes.
Outside of pyramid schemes.
Actually, with that in mind, could we just bring up the house lights a bit, please? For those of you who were not alums of this project, we have probably one of the largest gathering of Augment alums, NLS alums anywhere, and they all have a special badge that so identifies them, but would everybody who was on the Augment NLS team just stand up? Just as a coda on this panel, I want to emphasize something that I think cannot be emphasized enough today. This is not just history. This is also present tense. The Augment system is still running today. It has evolved. It is still being developed. We did not have time to do a demo of it up here, and Doug is still doesn't trust computers yet. So look for people with the Augment alum badges and talk to them about where they're at today and what it was like then. And keep in mind that this stuff is still going forward. And with that, I want to thank our panel. Yeah, you can just put them on the chair. I'm tethered to a mic, so I will guide you back that way. And thank you. Oh God, I'm going to switch mics again, excuse me. By the way, the comments about display technology, some things never change. We had a cutting-edge display device back here. It's displaying on the screen, and as you all can see, it's still a little dim, though at least you're not going to get oil all over your clothes when you approach it. It took hours and hours to set up and being carefully calibrated. And Alan Kay wandered in this morning. He will be speaking later today, and he says, "Hey, I noticed a display you're using. You want to use mine?" And folks looked at him blankly. He says, "Oh yeah, I've got one of the new flipping mirror displays in my car, and it's a lot better than this, and it doesn't need to be registered, and it's just the size of a briefcase." But we couldn't figure out how to install it. That Bill English had not yet arrived, and so we were stuck. Great. If we could run, before I introduce our next presenter, if we could run the next video, please.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification directives. Created for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests, obeying contradictory thoughts. Unification of the laws is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Because the next presenter actually was an extra in that. His hair is, it actually is, apart from being a wonderful video to look at, it's also directly relevant to the next presenter's presentation, Tim Lenoir. But before I introduce Tim, I just want to say a word about this film and why it is directly relevant to the mission here at Stanford of the Silicon Valley Archives. It is astonishing how ephemeral all this technology around us is. I wanted to show this video, and I called up Apple Computer, and they said, "We'd love to show it to you. We'd love to have you show it, but we have two problems with that. One is we don't have a copy anymore at the company." And it's not just Apple. We called other companies for other videos. This was back in the days. Once upon a time, if you announced something before you were ready to ship, that was vaporware and it was a bad thing. But Apple, with this video, invented an entirely new product category, and that was visionware, which is if you announced something you had no intention of building, that was a good thing. And it set off all sorts of, a whole vernacular of videos like this, and some others you'll see later today. But what was amazing, that no one had copies, we couldn't get a copy, and we finally had to find a copy here at Stanford. That was the only place we could find a copy. And in fact, when we tried to get permissions to use it, we couldn't even get permissions because they expired. And then the lawyers pointed out that we were allowed to show it under the academic exclusion to the normal copyright rules. So the fact that you were able to see that is because of the Stanford Silicon Valley Archives, which we're trying to build. And what a perfect way to introduce Tim Lenoir. Tim is a professor of history and chair of the History and Philosophy of Science program here at Stanford. Like most good academics, he has a fascinating background where he's done deep academic work on the history of the biological sciences in Germany, multiple books, most with German titles that will not appear on the shelves of Stacy's bookstore anytime soon. But very fortunately for us, some years ago, Tim turned his attention to understanding the history of technology here in Silicon Valley, and has been one of the leading scholars trying to make sense of the history of innovation and ideas in the Valley in general, and as a special project has been looking very closely at the history of Doug Engelbart's work and the SRI team. And he is here this morning to talk to us and help us put into context the ideas of the Augment team and where they fit over the last 30 years. So please join with me in welcoming Tim Lenoir.
Well, thanks very much for that very warm introduction. And I'm here to talk a bit about what aspects of that 1968 demo and the behind-the-scenes sort of activities that were going on at Stanford Research Institute remain to be completed. What was and what is Doug Engelbart's unfinished revolution? And I think we've heard in the previous panel quite a bit about what some of the celebrated contributions are. We're all familiar with the technological side of the contributions of the SRI team, Doug Engelbart and his colleagues. Of course, the computer mouse, but display editing, linking, in-file object addressing, hypermedia, all of these were elements of what we now take to be standard operating practice that were demonstrated in that 1968 video. But it seems to me that another thing that people like to point to is to the development of ideas, the flow of ideas, especially people and technologies that went from Stanford Research Institute, the Augmented Research Center, and also, especially at that time, the enormous influence and the enormous contribution of ARPA and other universities such as MIT, timeshare project and things of that sort, early developments of computer graphics, Ivan Sutherland's work on Sketchpad, those kinds of things sort of made their way out into the community, first at Xerox PARC and timeshare, and then we've heard Charles Irby and others moved on from Xerox PARC to Metaphor to Apple and a variety of other organizations. And I think one of the things that comes from this, one of the sort of really interesting aspects of the reception of this work has been a fundamental sort of misinterpretation, a fundamental overemphasis on the technologies that were developed there. And one of the kind of standard stories that one hears is that this was en route to the development of the personal computer, and to a certain extent it certainly was. If you look at, I think that 1984 Apple Macintosh ad, that wonderful ad sort of pictures for me, the sort of mood of the times, sort of the big brother emphasis in the background versus the young, independent, free personal computer user, fortunately female in this case. But I think the interesting aspects of this project, of the Augmentation Research Center that went uncelebrated and that remain to be finished are the things that we should concentrate on here, and I hope the things that that the historical projects that I'll describe at the end of this will highlight for you. And so it's really, to me, the interesting pieces here are the emphasis on augmenting human intellect and collective intelligence, enhancing the productivity of groups as well as individuals. That was the key emphasis of Engelbart's group at SRI and their continued efforts after this 1968 video. And crucial to that whole program was the notion, quite alien at the time, as a historian looking back on these kinds of events, one sees that really what people were interested in was automation of the office. They were interested primarily in computers as computational devices, whereas Engelbart and his group emphasized computers as communications devices. And that comes out especially clearly in a variety of the papers in which they publish their ideas. And what I find really interesting in this whole set of materials that one can follow through the numerous drafts in the archive of the project, the various efforts to sort of win sponsors for this project. One of the things that I find especially interesting is a sort of coevolutionary framework that Engelbart and his colleagues stress over and over again. In the sort of user-unfriendly language of humans using language, artifacts, and methodologies in which he is trained was the sort of fundamental system that Engelbart stressed. And crucial in this was the notion that not only are the technologies important, but also that as we evolve these technologies, our own personal abilities will be transformed, our own personal abilities to communicate with others will be transformed, and along with that are going to have to be a coevolution in organizational structures to match this new technological capability that we have. In addition to that, Engelbart and company stress the different kinds of values that are going to be needed to co-evolve with this, to utilize this new technology effectively. So it wasn't just things. So, for example, in some of the types of values that are referred to, Engelbart, after this is one of the wonderful things about looking at the archival materials, he makes notes on a sheet of paper after he attended the first meeting to form the ARPANET. He was present at that meeting. And after this meeting, he starts thinking about what the network is going to mean when you plug this system that they've been developing into it. And one of the things he notes is that it's going to really change the notion of authorship. He also writes down, jots down a note to himself that it's going to require people to have really different notions about sharing information. It's going to open up all kinds of new possibilities for creating different forms of trust among human communities. So these social technologies are as much a part of the revolution that Engelbart foresaw as the mouse and hypertext and the other enabling technologies. Is that Doug talking out there now? Oh, okay. Here's I think, a really wonderful quote to sort of sum up this point that one finds. Here's Engelbart seated at his personal workstation, as he described in that opening segment of the video. And he says, this is really, and this is in 1967, he's writing this. The augmentation system is more complex than the technological subsystem upon which it depends, he says. The changes in our ways of thinking and working will be, he says, a revolution like the development of writing and the printing press all lumped together. I think a really prescient, visionary kind of statement. One couldn't have imagined this, I think, from another perspective in the mid-1960s. Now, what were some of these kind of social technologies that Engelbart and company developed, and how did they imagine these things to work? What would be the new forms of practices that we would engage in? One of the things that they began calling this system was a knowledge workshop. The idea behind the knowledge workshop was that rather than utilizing networked computer facilities to promote access to large computational facilities or databases or data banks and things of this sort, this, of course, was part of the picture, but really what was more heavily emphasized was the idea of having different kinds of tools available to compose messages, to edit those things, and also to create inline, in-document hyperlinks to be able to reference any piece of a document, any word in a document, and not just to reference the entire document as a sort of hyperdocument. And the idea was that one could insert any kind of message and annotate this in any kind of way, and you would establish through this a network of various contributions. Part of this, another dimension of this social technology that was enabled by the hardware was the idea of being able to conduct meetings online and with colleagues where you're sharing screens, which they called shared blackboards, sharing screens with computers at distant locations, or even, as you see here, a kind of meeting where the group is performing that operation which they refer to so frequently, bootstrapping. That is, trying out the various technologies, trying out the various forms of social organization, collaboration, seeing how they work on themselves, as opposed to just sort of creating this stuff and sending it out there in the world. Another piece of the knowledge workshop, in fact, something that ultimately became its core, something that I think we should all work towards achieving, which we still do not have, is what they call the NLS journal system. The journal system was an unbelievable resource, I think, in the sense that on the one hand, it was a sort of log of daily activities of the group. Whatever you're thinking about, think of it as like a kind of Post-it that you stick on the wall somewhere. You stick that, you add that to the journal. It becomes part of the journal. Any text that you're writing, any text that you're downloading becomes part of the collective online journal. These elements then were preserved and organized, and the idea was to bring them together into a variety of different forms of optics so that you could view any different level of this depending upon your access, and there were, of course, and continued to be concerns about identity and preserving privacy and things of this sort. These were all kinds of issues that the group wrestled with. But ultimately, in this kind of sea of bits, one would be able then to have generate even publishable kinds of documents, just like a regular journal, and linking those also to a library of other documents. And then this whole notion then of recording the dialogue that's going on in shared screen work and in this collaborative work, I think is really a prescient view here. This is a statement that Engelbart makes about this new form of work that I think we could all learn from today. We must acknowledge that the march of technology will allow us to record ever broader dialogue media for effective studying and integration, leading to the day when a shared screen telephone session with full video connection of participants' images can be captured in total within digitized data forms to be submitted as an item of recorded dialogue so others can later benefit from the record of the real-time conferencing. In fact, that's what we're doing today. We are sending out this broadcast as a live webcast. It's being recorded, and it's going into an archive. The idea would also be to enhance research intelligence through this annotation technology, finally leading to the ultimate sort of end of this knowledge workshop would be for any kind of community of knowledge workers what Engelbart thought of as the community handbook. And this community handbook would include the kind of strategies, the principles, the hypotheses, the sort of special working glossaries and so forth, comments, errata, suggestions, hunches, all different levels of work that went on in the knowledge community would be part of this so-called handbook. And the idea would be to update the community's knowledge in this handbook that would be online and referenceable at all times. Now this brings me to why I'm here to plug our project, the Silicon Valley Archives. We've been here at Stanford in the libraries and in the program that I teach in, interested in creating an archive that would look at the development of all kinds of technologies, not only related to computer technologies, but also biotechnologies and a variety of things here, and looking at and being able to track the flow of individuals from research projects, whether they're in specific companies or in Stanford University Research Laboratories, even Berkeley Research Laboratories, out into into the community. And what we're trying to do is to move beyond the sort of standard paper archive, which reflects in certain ways the viewpoint of a single individual. Engelbart's papers here at Stanford, for example, are a fine representation of his viewpoint. But what we'd like to do is to expand that into a flexible resource. That leads to this new project that we've got going, where we create we're trying to implement actually the technologies and the goals of the original Bootstrap project in bootstrapping the history of that project. And what we want to do is to build a community memory that incorporates the creators of the technology and these ideas in it, not only as objects of study, but as also contributors and co-authors of the history that we hope to write from it.
Would still have been something very unique. And I was very disappointed in the months that followed that. I just thought that lots of people would start doing similar work because they would see that, boy, this is the way things are going to go. And it didn't.
So the way in which, in true bootstrap fashion, the way that we're trying to bootstrap this is we organize a variety of forums that ask people questions. This is a video clip that's on the forum. We ask people to give us their views about why this technology that we've seen demonstrated here, which seems like the thing that we still want today, why that didn't take off in 1968. And we ask you to submit your comments on that, or if possible, if you're interested or if you have archives of your own, to submit those archives to us, and we can accept any sort of forms. HTML or other text forms, video clips, and so forth. And I think the really crucial piece of our story here is that we're interested in collecting other people's points of view, other people's ideas, and putting them into an accessible form that you would be able to access through the Stanford University Library catalogs or any major library catalog. Similarly, with persons, we're seeking information on individuals. Those of you who are original alumni of the group, we ask you to submit your files. We want to create archives around your work as well. And finally, what we're hoping to do is to build a number of resources analogous to this that we would be able to launch a really collective community effort on Silicon Valley and the computer professionals who've made the technologies that we're talking about in this conference. Thanks very much.
Don't go anywhere, Tim. Stay up here. Okay, put your mic back on. We actually, you know, since this is all about interactive computing, we thought, do we have audience questions or do we not? And you all know the problem with that and challenge. If you ask one question, can everybody have a question and like? And we originally said, no audience questions. That's what breaks are for. And then we changed our mind. We said, well, we'll try one or two questions. So if you have a question or two for Tim, here's how it's going to go. This is no ordinary football. We have slit its little heart out and inserted a wireless microphone in it. It is not a Stanford football. I apologize. It's, but it's not Berkeley. And so, actually, if I can have Bob out here, he's going to do the first pass. Great. Because the one thing about this football, we'll do two questions. It cannot be passed. You sort of have to toss it, because otherwise there might be injury to either a person or a microphone, and we don't want either. So, and also, I'm told, don't spike it. That would definitely screw up the mic. So, Bob, head it down. Put up your hand if you have a question. Bob's going to pick someone at random. While we're waiting for that, Tim, I have a question for you. In the original 68 demo, if you look carefully at the way people were using the mouse, you suddenly understand why the idea of mouse came, because, you know, we hold mice and the wire goes off the top. In the demo, they hold the mouse and the wire is going down past the arm. Do we know when that changed?
No idea.
Do we
there must be somebody. There's Alan Kay. He knows.
Stand up, Alan. Actually, can we pass the football back here just briefly, and then we'll bring it back to you. Just toss it gently. Everybody, heads up. You can toss it. Don't be too afraid. Great. Alan Kay. Why the mouse?
Well, I don't know there was a good reason for it, but the mice, I think the next set of mice that were made were optical shaft encoder mice that were made at Xerox PARC when Bill English and Jeff and a number of people came over. And there was a new set of ideas, which I'll let them talk about a little bit, that very large, sweeping project that incorporated a lot of the ideas of NLS. And the original Altos at PARC, by the way, had the 5-finger keyboards. And if you look carefully at pictures of the Alto, you'll see how the 5-finger keyboard and the mouse were connected in to the keyboard itself. And all of these things were designed to be able to be shoved under there was a sort of a little cavity where you could stow the mouse and the 5-finger.
Mouse hutch.
Yeah, and of course nobody ever used it. Why would you ever want to stow that? But that was a part of that original design, which was done for the Polos terminal. And that one sort of mandated that the end of the mouse come out the top, because that's how it looped.
Xerox, who turned everything upside down. Let's give Tim a hand. Thank you, Tim.